Well, first of all, welcome to the Spread Creative Studio here in Chelmsford in Essex. And it's a lovely sunny day here. It's quite warm, actually. And I guess I ought to tell you, for those, some of you already know me and know the business, but for those of you who don't, my name is Gareth and I'm founder of Spread Creative. I started at art school, spent 15 years in commercial interior design with some great clients like Sony and Reebok, Cisco Systems and others, working across Europe and some of the States, before transitioning to a real vocational project, actually, and that was to work with people in prison for about 10 years, working eventually as a director of a national charity here in the UK. And then came out of that and back into the creative field and started to freelance as a creative, working with businesses particularly. And out of that, Spread Creative was born 4 or 5 years ago. And now we work with charities and businesses and individuals, helping them really develop their voice, a lot of brand consultancy. We, in a nutshell, we figure out what to say and how to say it. And we always take the advice of our parents, and that is to think before we speak. So in many ways, Spread as a design studio is that space where we think before we speak. And so that when it comes to speaking, all the hard work's already been done. We've figured out what to say and now how to say it. And then we go on to develop all the creative content. So of course we create products like brand identities, visual systems, websites. We make films, travel quite a lot with that, making documentaries, PR, advertising, print material, graphic design, the whole range that you would expect from a design studio. So that's us here. That's what we do. So it's really great to welcome you to this. Actually, it's the first of our webinars. So it's a bit of a step into the unknown. I'm used to talking to large groups of people. I give a lot of talks to schools and various other bodies like that, but this is the first time that we've done a webinar. And we wanted to start with, actually, this was brought about by an interview that I did last year with someone who came into the studio here and spent about an hour interviewing me about Spread and about how we do our work, the kind of work that we do, and more particularly to understand why we do that. And out of that interview, and we've started to release short 5-minute videos of that on LinkedIn recently. Out of that came this webinar series and started to think about how can we communicate with you folks about the kind of work we do and why we do it, and see if we can add value to what you do. And so we wanted to start this first one with that kind of essential question of why and finding your why. And I sent out the invite on LinkedIn, and I got this. I was thinking about, well, how do we get started? How do we get into the meat of this? What's the sort of kickoff point? And I received this lovely message. I won't name the person, who says, "Oh no, not the Simon Sinek old tosh. He did well with repackaging the idea and presenting it, but it's a bit old now." So that was encouraging. And but you know, as I reflected on that, I thought, actually, that's a great place to start, isn't it? The Simon Sinek old tosh of communicating your why. Now, for some of you, I'm aware that what we'll talk about today is brand new. Might be the first time you've heard some of these concepts. For some of you, you'll have started implementing it, or you may have seen it. And for some of you, this is, you know, you're already experts in the field, and I'm preaching to the converted. So wherever you stand on that, I hope that if this is new information, it's really useful to you. If you're a seasoned pro at this whole approach to communicating the work that you do, then I hope that at least it will be an encouragement to know that there are others on your side, that this isn't just old tosh, but actually it's kind of new, still new and still relevant. But also I wanted to bring a slightly different angle particularly to the TED Talk that Simon Sinek gave. So we'll be looking at that TED Talk. We're looking at a potential pitfall with regard to that. And then we'll be talking a bit more about authenticity. And as we get towards the end of our time together, probably around about 10 past, 1:15, I'll open up to questions. So if you have any questions, try and stay engaged. Stick something in the chat. I've got a couple of people co-hosting, so they'll keep an eye on that. But at the same time, we'll come back to questions later on when we'll open it up and we'll see what you have to say. So let's look at that. Let's go back to that Simon Sinek TED Talk. So this was back in 2010. Simon Sinek did a TED Talk that's now had 15 million views on YouTube. And in it, the basics of it is that he takes what a lot of businesses do in terms of how they communicate their work, and he reverses it. Okay, accepting and acknowledging that this wasn't his original thinking. But this idea that there are three things to communicate, and he talks about the golden circle. At the heart of it is your why. Surrounding that, the next stage is your how. And then lastly is your what. And he suggests that most people, most companies, most businesses, charities, when they're communicating what they do, they start with their what. Then they get to the how, and occasionally, but not often, communicate their why. And he juxtaposes that in this video specifically with Apple, who revolutionized the way that people communicate, but because they started with their why. And their why is to think differently. That's what they do each day. Anyone who works with Apple, anyone who's involved with the company, development of products, R&D, all of those things, they think differently. That's the whole kind of heart of it for them. And so they started to reach out to people with that sense of, we think differently. If you're the kind of person who thinks differently too, then you're our kind of people. So they immediately start communicating their values way before they get into what they produce. So they say, we think differently. And then their how is, so we gather whole bunches of people who think differently and who want to create products for the next generation of people who think differently. So again, they're tying in the values. And then finally they say, oh, and by the way, we also make computers. So their what, the computer, is the last thing they communicate. And Simon Sinek suggests that most people would say, we make computers and we make it out of these, and we make it out of great products, and it's good, it's lasting, it's robust, it delivers this kind of performance. So they go from the what into the how, but very rarely do they get to the why. And for many people who, I guess, saw that for the first time, and actually for us here at Spread, when I saw that for the first time, I thought, that's really interesting. We need to really rethink how we do our work. Because the way that we speak to our customer, if we can reverse it and start speaking in terms of value, what Simon Sinek suggests is that if you communicate your values, people who share those values will be locked in, and they stay locked in because it's like they found their people. And that's why you get these kind of massive advocates. You're either an Apple person, or if you're in cameras, it's either you're a Nikon person or you're a Canon person. You tie into that brand, oftentimes for the long term. And it transforms how businesses speak to their customer with values, with purpose, identifying with their consumer, with the customer. And aligned values build long-term a long-term customer experience. But one of the things I wanted to talk about in this session was what happens when there's this idea that you figure out your why in order to communicate it to your audience, to your customer base, or to the customers that you want. And a lot of that work goes in, and a lot of companies do it. They put a lot of effort into communicating their why to their customer in order to win their business. And as I was reflecting on this, and as we do our work here at Spread, one of our core values is that we want to see that same why, that same message that goes out to the customer being reflected back in to the business that's communicating it. So it's not just a message that's going out, but going in. So what happens when those brand values that these companies tell you don't match up with the behavior of the brand itself? When you discover that it's actually what you're hearing from that brand is just marketing, just spin. A great example right now would be P&O Ferries, who talk on their website about their values and about inclusion, about sustainability, and about building trust. And yet at the same time, in order to cut costs, sack 500 people or 800 people, is it, by Zoom, in order to replace them with agency workers, some of whom are earning less than £2 an hour. And suddenly you've got a whole, community now, a bunch of public who are saying, hang on a minute. 1 minute you're saying that we're a trustworthy company for you to invest in. We like those values. That's why we travel with you. And now we realize that that's just spin. That's just advertising. That's just marketing, that you're just telling us that because you want our business. You don't believe it because it's not replicated. It's not reflected in who you are as a business. And that's a massive problem for brands. I'm old enough now and some of you might remember, not suggesting any of you are as old as me, but Gerald Ratner gave a speech to the Institute of Directors at the Albert Hall in 1991. And Ratner, if you don't know, they used to have a sort of a low-end jewelry store on just about every high street of every town in the country. Huge business. And he, I'll actually read it to you because it is extraordinary what he did. Because, a jewelry brand, luxury, bling, it's gold and all those, kind of ideas of, buy from us and you get something really precious, something of real value, of real meaning. And he said during his speech in 1991, we also do cut glass sherry decanters, complete with 6 glasses on a silver plated tray that your butler can serve you drinks on, all for £4.95. And people say, how can you sell this for such a low price? I say, because it's total crap. And he went on to say that one particular set of earrings was cheaper than a prawn sandwich from Marks and Spencer's, and that the Marks and Spencer's prawn sandwich would probably last longer. With those comments, he wiped 500 million off the price of Ratner's, because suddenly their customer base realized, many of them, I guess, understood, but they knew that the quality they were buying into was just a marketing tool. And actually that wasn't reflected in the values of the company itself. I don't know, many of you may have seen some of the work of Jim Keedy, who made a documentary, Behind the Swoosh. And he's been working since the 1990s to hold Nike to account for some of their practices, for a brand that tells their customer that we believe in young people, that we want young people to realize their dreams. And at the same time, we're discovered in some areas, or accused in some areas, I should say, of exploiting those same young people in different parts of the world. And so this is becoming, quite a big issue when it comes to the work that we do, is to say, how can we communicate your why? Tell us what your why is. And I want to sort of juxtapose 2 companies that we've spoken to recently. Tell us what your why is so that we can communicate that. And they're both in a similar sort of business, actually. There's a recruitment company came to see us about a year, maybe 2 years ago, I guess probably just before the pandemic, actually. And they wanted us to rebrand their organization and invest quite a lot of money rebranding and reaching out with new messaging. And it's a really exciting opportunity. And as we started to talk to them about what's your why, they were involved in a particular field of AI and science. And I was saying, it must be amazing to get out of bed every day because you know that on any one given day, if you place the right person in the right company, you could change the world, and that you would be part of that process. And what would it be like if we transformed the language around recruitment, which has often got quite a poor reputation? What if we flipped the whole narrative of recruitment and made it more about imagining what might happen if you place the right person in the right job. And actually what was revealed in that conversation was that actually they just love making money. And so for us, that was a big turnoff. And actually, as it turns out, we didn't move forward with that project. Now we are working now with a new company a couple of years later, another recruitment agency, probably one of the most ambitious pieces of works that we'll have taken on to date. And I spoke to the managing director and I said, tell me a story that is one of your great stories from the work that you do. And she thought about it for a moment. She said, you know what? We hired someone about a year ago and who was down on their luck. They'd had various problems and had found themselves in £20,000, something like £20,000 worth of debt, back home living with parents, struggling to make ends meet, and things were going from bad to worse in terms of the debt. And she said, you know what, we just saw something in that young man, and we thought, you know what, we're going to do what we say. We are a recruitment company. We place people in great jobs to see what happens. And she said, he just got it. And his work for us was extraordinary. And within a year, he paid off all of his debt. And now he's saving to buy his own place. And to see him flourish and to see him grow. And it became a really emotional moment. We get quite emotional anyway at Spread. Because, and I think we'll come back to that on a webinar we've got planned down the line about how we engage our emotions. But there was a real pause at that moment in the meeting where everyone just suddenly thought, that's exactly it. You know, you're a recruitment company that cares about changing people's lives, that either what they go on to do changes the world, or maybe it just changes their world. And it's like, these are our people. These are people who understand that we don't just tell people on the outside what our why is, we live it and breathe it, and it's part of our DNA as a company. Because it's not just, this communication of our why isn't just out, but it's in. And actually there is a big shift, it seems, at the moment in employment, where that's becoming one of the key issues for people. Moving towards net positive behaviors where companies are seen to be giving back almost more than they're taking in. They're giving more than they're taking. Genuine corporate social responsibility. And this sense of company-wide, top to bottom authenticity behind the words that they speak. You have seen it in, I'm constantly reminded of it when I see Deborah Meaden on Dragon's Den. Whenever a company comes in and says, part of our USP is sustainability, you see this sort of look in her eye, and then she goes after them and, you know, like in packaging, is the cardboard sustainable? Is the glue used in the packaging sustainable? She drills down, and if she finds that this company that's using their outward communication, their USP of sustainability is not authentic, that those values are only what they project to the outside in order to get sales, but they don't run through the DNA of the company, then she says very quickly, I'm out. Either she says it quickly or she gives them a lecture first. Oftentimes she gives them a lecture and then says, I'm out. And you can see her getting quite cross, because there is this shift going on between not just saying your why or creating your why or manufacturing a why, but actually companies that embody the why before they even go out to their customer. Because if you just imagine for a moment, if Simon Sinek's, find your why and communicate your why is X, and then it's the outward bit, but the inward bit is the Y. X plus Y equals something extraordinary. And there is a growing, we did it with a company a little while back. We were asked to make a film for a local company here in Chelmsford that creates as part, they do a lot of home adaptations for the elderly and for those with disability. Some extraordinary work, from anything from grab rails right through to kind of major house conversions with hydrotherapy pools and hoist systems and everything. That's an extraordinary company. And they asked us to make a film about one of their products, and along with the manufacturer of the product. And it was this plastic sort of TARDIS-like box that would sit in a living room downstairs that contained an enclosed shower and toilet facility. So it's just like a shower toilet pod, all made out of sort of plastic, very quick to install, very quick to take away. The only bit of work in the house that needs doing is a little bit of electrical supply and water supply. And it's there as a temporary bathroom for people who can't get upstairs. And it aids people with bed blocking and things like that. So if someone goes to hospital, there was one particular case of an elderly man who'd fallen over, hit his head, was in hospital, but they couldn't, he was well enough to go home, but they couldn't send him home because he didn't have washing and bathroom facilities on the ground floor. And they didn't feel it was safe for him. The occupational therapist didn't feel it was safe for him to go upstairs. So it's either install a massive stair lift with all the lead time for that, or it was install a downstairs bathroom, 6 months, by which time for him, actually, as it turned out, would have been too late. But by installing this plastic shower pod, it transformed his experience of being able to be at home. So we watched a film that the Australian arm of the company had made. And it was all about the what and the how. And this is the shower pod. I won't use the Australian accent, certainly not for those of you who are on this webinar from Australia. But this is the Careport shower pod. This is how it goes together. This is how it's demountable. This is the curtain. This is how the shower works. This is how the toilet works. And it conforms to all the various, regulations. And it's just a 5 or 6 minute film, just constantly going through all the features and benefits of this thing. And they wheeled this poor guy in to sort of demonstrate it. And when they asked us to make a film that was similar for the UK market, my initial instinct was, no, we're not going to do that. Because I don't think we're selling a shower pod. And I think if you think you're selling a shower pod, I think you've misunderstood the product that you have. And so we had quite an interesting conversation with them. And in that conversation, I think I understood and helped them to understand that the thing that they were selling was not the shower pod, but it was bringing someone home. It was reconnecting families, creating that opportunity. And so we then made a film with an elderly couple where he was coming out of hospital. It didn't have any words on the film whatsoever, no spoken narrative. Where he was coming out of hospital, the company was installing the shower pod in a lounge and installing a bed. And then he arrived home, was embraced by his wife. And then they sat on the edge of the bed together next to the shower pod, and it just said, bringing people home. And as a piece of, it's quite interesting, as we show people that film, most people get very emotional. So the idea of becoming emotional at the idea of a plastic shower pod is quite interesting. I love it, actually. But the piece of work, and I have to confess, the piece of work that we didn't get to do, and as I thought about it, I wish we had had the chance to do, was to take that film, and I hope the company did, and that is to show it to the people on the manufacturing floor. Because it's not just about communicating it outward, but communicating it back inward, so that even the shift workers on the factory floor who are doing the moldings and the pressings and and the quality assurance, that they would carry that same wire. The reason I'm building this, the reason I'm putting this, I'm making sure that this plastic molding is perfectly square and has everything it needs to have, is so that Eric can come home to Jean. And so that idea of communicating your why throughout the whole company radically transforms the relationship, not just that your customers have with the company, but your employees have with the company, that they understand their purpose, they understand the values. There's that famous story, isn't there, of the the guy who was sweeping the floor at Cape Canaveral in Florida, working for NASA. And someone asked him about his job. And he said, what is it you do? Or what was your greatest achievement? And he said, I helped put man on the moon. Great example of a company that understood how to engage their employees in the why, the purpose. And that's becoming more and more important, because more and more people are turning away from just going to work for money, that they work to live. More and more people are wanting to live to work, that there's a work-life balance. Some part of this whole kind of net positive movement, there are some interesting stats, and I'll just read you a few. In its State of the Global Workplace report, Gallup concluded that, get this, 85% of employees are either not actively engaged or are actively disengaged in their workplace, meaning that only 15% of employees are actively engaged in the work that they're doing. This is the Combe Port and Novelli Purpose Study. 2/3 of consumers would be willing to shift to an unknown but purpose-driven brand, which is a really interesting idea, isn't it? That they will prefer to go with a clearly evident purpose-driven brand, even if they hadn't heard of that brand before, rather than a more famous brand. 9 in 10 Gen Zs, Gen Z, depending where you come from, think that companies have an obligation to solve environmental and social problems. And that 2/3 of millennials won't take a job with a company that has poor CSR practices. And that there was a deeply felt sense of purpose that ties millennials to their jobs. And where there was a purpose to their job, 71% intended to stay at the job they were in. Unilever, who've done a lot of work on this, they did some studies of their own family, of their own stable of brands, and they discovered that their own purpose-driven brands grew 69% faster with higher margins than the rest of the business. The millennials already, I mean, I'm Gen X, and I believe it, but millennials are shifting in huge numbers towards finding work that has a purpose. And Gen Zs, 9 out of 10, recognize that companies have a responsibility to solve some of the world's problems and want to be involved in companies that do that. And trust being the essence of social cohesion, that no company thrives without trust. And a quote from Mark Twain is that trust comes on foot and leaves on horseback. And we can see that with P&O. And that a problem, of course, for P&O as well is that P&O Ferries is a different company entirely to P&O Cruises, and yet P&O Cruises, by extension, are having a massive problem with that overspill. Coming back to us at Spread, why are we talking about this? I mean, for us as a creative agency, and I guess it's embedded in our values. I mean, our key value, the thing that drives me, the purpose is want to be moved. I want to engage in something that really grabs hold of you. I want to have a purpose-driven work life and to be moved, as a creative. If I want to, Alan Cumming, interestingly, on Desert Island Discs this weekend, he talked about he couldn't engage with anything that didn't make him gasp. I've only got so long left. So if I'm going to listen to music, or if I'm going to go to the opera, or if I'm going to watch a film, or if I'm going to engage in literature, I want to engage with something that makes me gasp. And for us, as we get out of bed each day and come into the studio, we want to work with those clients that feel that same thing, that there's an alignment with our values, because we're investing ourselves. And so we have a sort of a list of criteria, which we call our hell yes criteria. And actually, the next webinar in this series on the 26th of April is about hell yes, about how aligning your values with your clients and your work can transform, your approach to it. So it's kind of taking the themes we've spoken about today and say, how do you actually implement them, and how do you make courageous decisions about that? And, working with the company that does the adaptations, we're working with someone at the moment, a great client, Business Plan for Peace, with Dr. Scylla Elworthy, who has spent 45 years seeking to end armed conflict worldwide. That's like, well, that's a why we can get on board with. And so doing that work for them is just a pure joy. It allows us to invest all of ourselves in everything they stand for. And working with this new recruitment company where the managing director's great story is the transformation of a life of someone they've employed. And so that sense of value and purpose runs throughout their whole company. And that's such an important thing for us, I think, as we make our way forward for Spread, particularly because in order for us to give ourselves and engage in that emotional work, we want to work with clients who feel the same way. Dr. Scylla Elworthy talks and has talked a lot about how businesses do carry that responsibility, and that there is a shift between left brain thinking in business and right brain thinking. Whereas left brain thinking, very analytical, numbers driven, profits. Whereas right brain thinking starts to engage things like empathy and social responsibility and care, and that as business. And it's just been so amazing to work with those kind of people, because it's just given voice to what we've been feeling all along. It's like, yes, that's exactly it. When Alan Cummings was saying his thing at the weekend, I was in the car, and when he said, I want to engage with something that makes me gasp, I sort of shouted in the car. Thankfully, there's no one else around. But and one of the things that I talk to my two teenage kids about oftentimes is that as you go forward, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. And you may have heard this before, but thermometers, a thermometer in a room, it adapts itself, it changes, it adjusts itself to reflect the temperature, the prevailing atmosphere and the prevailing temperature in the room. And so you can see that sometimes with people that, there was a story actually about Michael Jordan, the great Chicago Bulls basketball player. And when he joined the Chicago Bulls, who weren't a great team at the time, he was a young man just drafted straight from college, where he'd been an absolute superstar on the college scene. But when he joined the Chicago Bulls, this is NBA players. This is some of the most elite, highest paid athletes in the world. And they went to an away game, and he was trying to find where all of his colleagues were, all the other players in the team. And he eventually found them in a hotel room with prostitutes and drugs and alcohol. And they invited him to join in. And in that moment, he said, no. And he turned away and he went to the practice court. And it stunned his teammates. And over the course of his career then, he transformed the Chicago Bulls team, not just a team, but as a franchise, their global image, their global identity. But at that moment, he had an opportunity to be a thermometer, to adapt his values and shape them to the values of the people in the room. But he chose to be a thermostat. And what thermostats do is thermostats change the environment. They change the temperature. They change the attitude in the room. And for Michael Jordan, the rest is history. But, you know, that probably wasn't the first time he had to make that choice. I guess he'd made that choice 1,000 times before that. I mean, that's a big thing to do on that day, an incredibly courageous thing to do. But as I tell my kids, don't be a thermometer, be a thermostat. And that's what we're trying to do here at Spread. And that's the kind of clients that we want to work with, that there's that alignment of values. We're looking for clients who passionately believe in what they do, are prepared to be emotional. We often weep with clients when we show them work that we've done on their behalf, films, promotional work. We often have people in the studio here crying when they realize that the work that we've created for them and how they're able to be seen to the outside world, but also reflects the values of their company. And so as thermostats ourselves, we love working with thermostats. And so if that's you, if that's where you're at, if you find yourself in a situation where, you know, you're in the middle of a company where there's lots of left brain thinking, you know, profit driven, you know, like the P&O ferries, profit driven, and feeling like you're out of sorts, then know that you're not alone, that there are other people out there who are shifting towards this net positive, authentic voice who want purpose in their work. And so, you know, feel free to come and talk to us. Come and, you know, come and drop me an email afterwards. Visit our website at spreadcreative.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn. Drop me an email. And, you know, we've sort of scratched the surface of this today. But if you want to, you know, particularly if you're looking at help with your own company, your own business, and how you plumb that depth of your organization, maybe you need to discover your why. Maybe you know what your why is, but you're struggling to communicate it to your customer base. Or maybe you've focused so much on that, you've forgotten to take it back into the company and make sure that from the cleaner to the chief executive, everyone embodies and understands those values, and everyone is rewarded and feels part of that story and part of that journey, that there's a true authenticity that runs through your business almost before you start to tell people that that's who you are. So as not to fall into this pit and being discovered and being found out of just creating a story of why because of Simon Sinek's incredible TED talk, but don't actually reflect that values in your business. I think with that, and to say, you know, again about our next webinar, which is about developing that sense of working with hell yes clients, aligning your values with the people you work with, taking some of those courageous decisions. That's on 26th of April, same time. But I think what I'll do is I'll ask the guys if we can open it up for questions, and get some feedback, get some thoughts, and see where we go from here. But as far as the sort of formal kind of delivery of information, that's where we've got to. It'd be great to sort of chat with some of you for as long as you can hang around. So yeah, let's throw it open.